Well, many thanks for staying with us. We're still talking about youths and cultural diversity. And of course, we'll be looking at our main focus being fashion. I mean, lots of other spheres, but fashion most importantly. I'm elated for the guests that will be joining us on the show today because these are people that are doing fantastically well in their different fields. All the way from Zimbabwe, we have Quiet P. Dube. Thank you, Quiet, for joining us. He is the Heritage Research and Development Officer at Amagugu Heritage. Thank you once again for being here with me on the show.
Thank you very much for having me today on the show.
It's my pleasure. Also, we have joining us youth leader and volunteer Rise Mzani in South Africa, Ntsika Maweni. Thank you, Ntsika, for joining me again on the show. All right, and finally, we have Namayana Asamuhuzi, humanitarian worker, Kyangwali in Uganda. Thank you also for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm glad to be on with you. Thank you.
We're glad to have you on the show. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about culture, the culture of the youth, especially across Africa, the level of impact that culture has on this present generation. And we'd like to get your view on it. How important do you think that culture is in shaping the lives of the youths in this community across the African continent?
Culture is very important, especially to the young generation, because it defines who we are, where we come from, and what purpose we have to serve within our different fields. Now, for one, many of our African countries found their freedom through after being colonized for many centuries. So once we were able to identify our individual identities in terms of our cultures and who we are, many of the young generation, especially in the 21st century, are going back in time to establish where their family comes from, what their family roots are, and in fact embracing the uniqueness that comes with being African in its entirety.
For that, Ntsika, and I love your smile, by the way. I almost got carried away.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I really do appreciate both your opinions on how important culture is, and one of our major focuses for today is fashion, how the fashion culture has influenced the youth, how it is influencing the youth, and what we see the youth of these days wearing, because of the cultural influence that the fashion industry has had. So what can we say, and this is to Namanya now, what can we say about the youth fashion in recent times, especially with the advent of social media playing a huge role in influencing how the youths across Africa dress?
Thank you, host. And just to start with, the culture perception here is that how does really someone identify themselves in regard to the cross-cutting areas entailing culture? Someone could identify themselves as taking their language as a priority within culture, taking their probably where they belong, their tribes, what are their symbols, what are their traditions, what are the norms, and then what are the cultural like the cultural arts that are within that is practiced within their culture. One thing that I can really say is that culture is having a very huge impact, and when you take in regards to the art that people create, like for example, I can say creatively, what I'm actually wearing here is an art that is being practiced in Kampala, Uganda here, that a group of youths like me who have actually gone through, who have probably actually got their education in arts and design, fashion, something of that kind. They have identified a certain location within the central business area of Kampala that for them they really have specialized in creating African wares that actually communicate. They communicate in this way that, okay, let's say what I'm wearing currently, I have on it like Uganda. there are different designs that they put. At times they go ahead and put designs of, actually they can put designs of probably they can have a country, a map of a country on a t-shirt like what I'm wearing. It actually has a huge impact that is seen globally, but also taking the fact that the trends in the digital transformation. When you look at the tech, people are often also getting impacted by the influence of technology. And when you see the various aspects, this does not only apply, it's actually cross-cutting to the youths. Youths can go on and have fashions that they could have interest of. Maybe probably the Western fashion is taking up, and then people feel that is the test, so that should be the fashion, or they should follow. Yet traditionally, when you come back, like in Uganda here, or in where I come from, Uganda, there are different ethnic regions that each within these regions have in their cultural wares, and that is being promoted. But however, the influence of the growth in technology, in seeing what is on social media. Okay, I see this is a trend, I must go in there. So that impacts negatively, because someone else is going to pick up and say, oh, well, I can follow what this other section of the youths are coping up with currently. So it can sift away people's attention, and you find that they can actually live along the local cultural wares that could be promoted more, that should be like within a cultural setting that is adopted, that is socially accepted. So it has an influence there. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for that, Namanya. And I like that you mentioned some very pivotal points where you talked about social acceptance, where you talked about adopting what other people do, especially in the Western world. And that would lead me to another line of this same conversation, where we're talking about the level of acceptance and what is attainable in certain places. And I'm going to give instances, right? For example, these days we see in the Western world, and even in the African continent, where a fashion designer shows off his or her work on a runway show. Now, those are runway costumes, but a lot of people do not understand that there are costumes and then there are, regular wears. So because of the influence of social media, for example, I see a costume. Now, I'm not saying that all dresses exhibited on runway fashion shows are costumes, right? I'm just saying that there are some that are not necessarily worn on a regular day, probably for music video shoots and all of that. But people now see it and then think that it's something that should be worn on a casual day, and then put it on and somewhat now look like masquerades, right? So I'm just trying for us to see the impact that social media has had. I mean, we've also seen that in different areas of the Western world. Now, we know how deeply rooted the African culture can be when it comes to respect, to modesty, for example. There are certain things that are attainable in the West that our typical African, or let me use where I'm from, Nigerian parents will not allow. But because these kids are exposed to these kind of things, these are the kind of things they see on their feed every day, they feel like they can put these things on and be accepted. And then they put it on, and in their own area, in their own society, people are looking at them like, what is she wearing? So I think that there is also that issue of people not understanding that this is or might not be socially accepted in your own area, even though you see it on social media. And that brings us to the problem of swallowing things line, hook, and sinker, and thinking that you can adopt everything that you see on social media. I don't know, Ntsika, do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, I do actually. Blessings. Thank you so much for your deeply rooted question. It gave me time to actually reflect and think about what the dress culture is like, particularly from where I'm from in South Africa, where your dress sense is highly influenced by your geographical location, in terms of if you're from the village, or if you are from the townships, or if you are from the city. And that highly influences the kind of styles that that you adopt. So, for example, given now that, we have access to social media platforms such as your Instagram and your TikTok, and you see your favorite influencers or musicians wearing particular items of clothing, that is often translated to think that we can wear those kind of items on the streets. I think in this day and age, particularly within the South African climate post COVID-19, many older generations have kind of allowed the younger generation to express themselves the way they see fit, but also in the same breath, many young people do understand that there are certain items that I would not necessarily wear should I go back home to my parents. So, for example, I wouldn't necessarily go back home with blue hair. Even though blue hair is accepted in a different setting from where I'm from, because they understand that how you dress and how you present yourself to the public is basically a self-expression of who you are and the message that you want to send across in terms of your identity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Ntsika, and thank you for shedding more light to my, like you said, deeply rooted question. But let's go now to Quiet. Quiet, don't be quiet on this issue. We're still talking about social media influence, right? As opposed to those days, for example, when the youth were inspired and shaped by mentors and great people that maybe they read about, people they see on TV, people that, they see in magazines and newspapers. Now the youth are influenced by their peers. And these peers are seemingly slaying on social media. So, for example, a typical person is influenced or motivated by what they see on their feed. They see someone, dressing a certain way or living a certain kind of life and all of that, and they want to copy that. So, how have we gone from, a culture of having the youths being influenced by older people, or not necessarily older, but people who are doing better than they are, to transiting into a generation where people are now influenced by the most mundane things. And I'm talking about the kind of car you drive, the kind of phones you use, the kind of language you speak. If you're a certain if you're from a certain generation and you're not speaking a certain kind of language, let's use the Gen Z, for example, if you're not adding period to all your sentences, then maybe you don't belong, So how have we transited from that very impactful kind of lifestyle to the very shallow or seemingly shallow kind of lifestyle where everything influences you? How does this affect the youth of this generation? Quiet.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, it's quite interesting one. Like you can also it's a deeply question. But allow me to just say the norms or the values or the culture that we are used to is later on. Like it's just different, right? But
Quiet, apologies. I'm so sorry for interrupting you, but we might need you to be maybe closer to your device, maybe your headset or something, or remove your headset. We can't hear you. It's kind of muffled, so we need it to be clearer. It's still muffled, quiet. We can give you time to try and sort that out while I'll just direct the question to Namanya. Please just take off your headset so we can hear you clearly. We'll get back to you on that. We'll give you time to fix that. But Namanya, if you can hear me and you have any ideas as to the question I asked, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. And the impact that the media is actually having is both that is positive and negative, if I can say, because negative in a way that the African tradition or the African culture is that is of the high. There's that high moral, the high moral discipline that the African settings, like it ranges, it cuts straight right away from how do you put on, how do you dress, because you could have witnessed this, and this happens, that the trend that the youths are picking up is that which is it's actually socially not acceptable. It's not that the culture actually appreciates, because you find because simply I could be having this on the media. I see, yes, this is the trend, people are wearing like this. Sort of in an African setting, like to an African child, you'd see that this is, if for example a girl wears the means, you get the means, and this is becoming like it's taking up in the society, because the people want to really have that as a normal trend. Yet that could be something that has to be done. It should be attached to a certain sort of activity, because some of these things are simply associated to certain kind of activity. For example, if I'm a musician, probably I'm shooting out something, and that is the trend, that should be attached to that. But now it's taking up like the general section, whereby each youth feels like I need to, and it actually again creates like to the youths that haven't reached a stage of themselves earning to be able to have these things by themselves. It actually forces them to having avenues of, let's say they're creating within themselves, how can I get the money, and then I afford a certain kind of dress, I probably afford a certain kind of suit that is quite expensive, and which is not really, that can push them into doing things which are like not really in order, that is acceptable. Someone can end up even going to have to steal, because really, if you don't have the finance at a certain stage, it may not really. Especially the young youths could face this as a challenge, because affording it alone could be a very something that is expensive. So forcing them to go and do other kind of things, and also positively, we can the youths can actually get from that a way of promoting certain lines, if I may say, the ones which are culturally like there are these cultural wares which are cross-cutting. I remember certain years back, the Nigerian wares which became very popular, they were actually also adopted. They were picked up by the other Western places, and people were wearing them up, which is actually a good one. And someone can fix in themselves there and start up sort of their own line and do something of that kind.
Right.
But also, yes.
Right. I mean, I like the both sides that you picked it from, the negatives and the positive, because I mean, it can't all be bad. So I like that you fused into the positives. Well, thank you for being with us. Please still stay with us. Now, we want to check out what people are saying. I mean, what the youth are saying about cultural diversity, especially when it comes to fashion and, you know, cultural adaptability and all of that. So let's take a look at what people have to say, but we'll go to that shortly. But let me ask Ntsika this question. Now, we're still talking about the youths being influenced heavily by what they see on their feeds these days, and that breeds the question: how gullible are the youths of this generation? I mean, you know, a lot of times people make some jokes that you have to have a certain level of self-control to go on social media, because when you enter, social media is like a big market, and once you enter into it, you're swayed. Okay, you patronize this, patronize that, and then before you know it, everything is rubbing off on you. So how gullible are the youths of this generation?
What a double-edged question. So on one end, I think it goes back to exposure and geographical location. So depending on where one is from and what their settings are like and what they're exposed to in terms of having access to even these social media platforms, at what age also influences the kind of level of gullibleness that they're exposed to. Because on one end, you can have those young people who understand the financial situation at home or their financial settings, and knowing that it could be great to aspire to see these particular things and these particular items of clothing, for example, and work towards being able to afford those things. Or on the other end, one might use the short route to actually gain access to those materialistic things so that they can appear popular within their peer groups. So it varies in terms of how gullible the youth is. And it is quite unfortunate in this day and age because of the level of accessibility to platforms such as your Instagram and your TikTok, where how on one end, several influencers or pages will influence the young people to actually love themselves, love their skin, love the skin that they're in, and actually aspire to be different. And then whereas on the other end, they teach the young people to actually live up to a particular aesthetic that might not be popular 5 years from now. So it does vary from one end to the next. And what we try to do within our various civil society programs and in community engagement programs is that we try to remind the young people that we mentor that, in fact, live to disrupt the status quo, be comfortable in your skin, and there's something that is unique about you that makes you who you are. So don't be fazed by the pressures of society, because those pressures change all the time, and what might be funny about you today might be the in thing 10 years down the line. So
all right, very well said, Ntsika. Thank you so much for that. Now, Quiet, I need to confirm that you are with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. And
okay, great. Now,
I'm also
sorry, I think that we're still having a bit of delay, but now I'm going to throw this one to you. It's true that social media and the internet generally gives unlimited access to as much information as one can consume. But now, don't we think that we're now getting to the point of information overdose? And by that, I mean, we see the things that are happening, and we've just talked extensively about how the social media feed and things that people see influence their behaviors, their dressing, their character. And I'm going to give this example. Now, sometime last year, right, there was this movie that was released. Now, it probably had nothing to do with each other, but this is just a typical example. The movie about a serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer, and something also happened in South Africa late last year, where a 21-year-old South African boy was arrested, or man was arrested after some bodies, I think bodies of 6 women were found in his home. And then, you know, we see a lot of instances like that where it seems as though people are taking things that they see on social media, and not just social media now, even movies, and then they're trying to experiment with it. We've seen where, some white people in a random school just go to buy guns. There was one where a guy, immediately he turned 18. He felt, okay, I'm legal enough, and I've seen things where people who are older become serial killers. And then he just went to a store and got a gun and went into a school and started shooting sporadically. So we see a lot of issues like that, and it is clear that these people's motives are influenced by what they see either on social media or in the movies or otherwise. So what do we say about that? Has it come time for us to now regulate how much of information that we consume, regulate how much of social media that we use? Quiet, that one was for you. Okay, unfortunately, I think that we still don't have Quiet, but I don't know if Namanya heard my question. We'll be right back to talk about that. But in the meantime, let's just brood on that, and then we'll come back to discuss it. This is still Fafanua Afrika, and we'll go on a short break. When we come back, we're still talking about the influence of culture, especially in this part of the continent, on the youth. Do stay with us. Many thanks for staying with us. It's still Fafanua Afrika, and we are still talking about a very important issue, which is how culture influences the youths, both online and even, in the present. And I still have my guests with me, of course. I have Apologies for that. I have with me Quiet, I have Ntsika, and I have Namanya, and we've been talking extensively about the impact of cultural diversity and how it can be fused together without causing any major spark. But anyways, unfortunately, before the break, we had some issues with Quiet audio, and we're still waiting for that to be rectified. But in the meantime, I asked the question, and I was hoping that Namanya heard my question, and I will just try to rephrase it. I was talking about how it looks as though social media and the internet generally gives unlimited access to as much information, but now it's seeming like we're getting to the point where we're having information overdose, and because of that, a lot of negative things are impacting on the youths because these are the things they're exposed to on a daily basis. So I'm asking, has it gotten to the point where we're now beginning to regulate how well we use social media or how much we use social media? Namanya, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Thank you. The impact really is being felt all over, and these impacts are really devastating if it is to be considered on the extreme of the negatives. Because one, you've got people going to immorality simply because the information that people get is there has been a little that is being done to ensure that there's protection of this information, and to which category of the population of the youths is it going to affect? Because there are contents that the movies, there are contents that they are accessible by any other age category, and in this digital era, you've got quite a young age population that does go and have access to information that actually can have an impact on them. Not only it can have like sort of an emotional disturbance to this young, especially the young youths who have, if they get access into these other movies that are really immoral. That is a very bad one to a very large extent. Right. And you find people growing up in taking up things which are not really acceptable. And the other part is that the information there are information that can be helpful, and also really depends on the particular individual who is going to use this information. Right. For example, if I'm having access to information that are maybe academical, that are religious, that if I'm shifting my focus to those kind of informations, it's impacting positively. But the other side of us viewing things which ought to be regulated, it's really has to do so with the regulation. I'm quite so happy that in Uganda currently the government is coming in place with a regulation of the information technology that is on ground.
Okay.
There's quite that, yeah.
All right. Apologies for interrupting you, but because of our time, right now I want us to go to the streets to see what people are saying about how culture influences the youths. And of course, since our major topic is fashion and culture, we'll also be looking at how, the fashion industry is influencing the youths. I mean, of course, it's a youth show and we can't do without hearing what the youths have to say. So please hold that thought. I'm still with my guest. We'll be right back to continue the conversation.
This cultural diversity tradition, because it exposes us to different types of culture, and we get to enjoy different delicacies, we get to see different attires, different tradition, different people's way of belief, and it tends to promote unity and bonding in the country. So I feel the youth should embrace this cultural diversity today, and we should know more about our ancient ancestral stories and food. Yeah, thank you.
I feel one of the ways through which youths can embrace cultural diversity is by firstly reading about different cultures. When I mean reading about different cultures, I don't just mean reading any book. I actually mean non-fiction books. When you mean non-fiction books, you mean books that are devoid of, unrealistic cultures. For example, The Women of Ogu is a book I read a long time ago that spoke about Ogu community in Ogun State and their cultures and their way of life. And secondly, I believe when you spend time in cultures, you spend time there, like you interact with the people of the community, you learn to eat their food, you learn to do things the way they do. That's another way of learning and embracing cultural diversity.
Reported about Uganda's culture for now close to 7 years. I understand cultural diversity as a state in which a nation or a region or area, whatever you may call it, has various cultural groups. This can be tribes or anything related to that. In Uganda, we have 56 tribes. So this means that Uganda has rich cultural diversity. Some of them are Nilotic speaking, but the majority are the Bantu speaking, the Bantu speaking tribes. Cultural diversity comes with its own advantages, such as the ability to attract tourism, because culture in itself is a tourism. So that's the advantage it has, that is that if you have many cultures, it means that you're likely to attract tourists, foreign tourists, because of your reach in culture.
Well, that being said, those were the views of the youths across Africa talking about cultural diversity and how to embrace it, and the importance, of course, of cultural diversity. Now, there is a saying, and this is directed at Ntsika. There's this saying that social media is a new parent. I mean, from the conversations we've been having for like 30 minutes now, I mean, it's a no-brainer that it's kind of tilting towards that direction. But I'd really like to hear what you have to say about that. Do you think that, seeing how social media has this huge impact on how there's a mix of culture, there's a mix of acceptance and also influence on the different youths across Africa and even across the world, do you believe that that saying is true?
I believe the saying to a certain extent, Blessings, because in the kind of world we're living in, especially in the 21st century, many parents, have to go out there, go and work multiple jobs just so that they can sustain their families. And more often than not, a child is usually given a technological device just to keep them busy. If they're not able to play outside, so most of the children will find themselves playing games or going onto these child-friendly websites if they have access to do so. Otherwise, they find themselves being taught by your radio presenters who produce childlike radio shows, or they watch television shows where they learn certain things and certain habits that they think is correct. So social media also does play a role in the sense that it kind of influences the kind of adults that the child thinks that they should evolve into becoming, which then brings us to ask the question of how involved are we in young people's lives in terms of shaping their minds and helping them see things for the better. Because the idea of information will always be out there. Information will always be accessible. The question now is the person who receives that information, who that person is, how that person is going to use that particular information to their benefit, which then brings us back to having to come to the understanding of the saying, which I grew up believing, that it does in fact take a village to raise a child. So in instances when the present parent is unable to be present for the child due to circumstances involving meeting work obligations, perhaps then we should find ourselves in spaces where we are able to rely and actually trust those around us within our circles to assist us in raising the children that we have.
All right, very well said, Ntsika. Thank you so much for that. Once again, we want to go to the streets, but this time around the streets of Twitter to see what people are saying about cultural diversity and how it impacts the youth. Let's take a look. Bastis says the cultural diversity in Africa is insane. You can literally walk 5 kilometers in any direction and come across a different ethnic group with its own unique language and culture. I must say there are lots of culture and, of course, diverse. El Africano says, people in the West can't even begin to grasp the vastness and cultural diversity of Africa. Where my dad is from, they don't know white people exist. Wow. I'm always amused when people speak of African people in broad terms. Another person says, cultural diversity in Africa should be protected as it constitutes a key factor for social, economic, and environmental development. Jean-Michael Connard says, 2 things people really don't grasp. 1, how big and diverse Africa is, and 2, it's gigantic in terms of area, and its genetic and the genetic and cultural diversity is probably greater than anywhere else in the world. Yet outside of Africa, people tend to view it as a homogeneous mass. And I think he's referring to the fact that a lot of people outside Africa believe that Africa is just one country and they speak one language. Africa is very diverse and beautiful. Now, Mars says cultural diversity is so important because you interact with people who are different, and it's like a new level of knowledge, and then it's like another, and then boom, you're in Africa. Cultural diversity. Okay. Ms. Lopez says, we're defined by our enthusiasm for cultural diversity, and we embrace our differences as a strength to make a country great. Now, Munyano Kilolo says, Africa's multilingualism and cultural diversity is an asset that must, at long last, be put to use. Multilingualism is normality in Africa. In fact, multilingualism is the norm everywhere. It is neither a threat nor a burden, according to Dr. Adama Owane. Well, those are the tweets that we have on today's episode of the show, talking about cultural diversity, its importance, and of course, its effect on the youth. I still have my guests with me, and I'm going to ask Namaya my next question, and which is talking about the future, what the future holds for looking at how fast-paced culture is spreading. Now, we have heard and we've seen that there are advantages of cultural diversity. We've seen how, I use the example of, the people accepting and integrating other people's culture on social media. And you also talked about the fact that, sometimes the different attires can sell out, and a lot of people can adopt it. And we see, aside that, talking about solidarity, for example, the case of Masa Amini, who, may her soul rest in peace, died in custody of the moral police, who that sparked a lot of protests at the time, and also talking about the Black Lives Matter as well. Now, I'm just trying to say that looking at how vast the culture spreads, how vast people adopt different culture and even fight for the rights of people, not exactly knowing what the culture is. I want us to take a look at, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. What do you think the future holds with how fast-paced the culture is spreading? What should we be expecting?
Well, thank you once again. There should be high expectations in areas of having culture going to be either, especially we here in Africa. If not a lot is done to ensure that the cultural rights get respected, this cultural diversities within Africa gets to be seriously guarded by us Africans, and ensuring that these cultural values, the different domains of culture gets to be promoted. We are seeing an era of actually the Western culture going to reign our culture, which is very negative, because given the different advantages our diversity has got, if it's something that we can fight for, we are going to see a very huge impact in the few years coming.
All right.
But there has to be something that is done to protect this. If it is not so, we are at risk of losing the importance that our diversity can bring to us as a continent.
All right, thank you so much for that, Namanya. I'll just like to say a quick thank you to my guests. We had Quiet P. Dube, Heritage Research and Development Officer, Amagugu Heritage. Apologies, we couldn't exactly get his audio. Would have loved for him to join us totally on the show. Now, we also have a youth leader and volunteer, Rise Mzani, in South Africa, Ntsika, Maweni, and Namanya Asamuhuzi, humanitarian worker, Kyangwali, in Uganda. Thank you once again for joining me on the show and, of course, giving your opinions as to cultural diversity. We really do appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you, have you join us on the show again another time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.